Thrifting for a living and being your own boss sounds like the dream, but do you really have what it takes to be a full-time reseller? I'm going to share everything I know that I learned from being a full-time reseller for over a year and the tips I have for you if you're thinking about making that jump. So really quickly, I was a full-time reseller several years ago after my daughter was born. I had been reselling for a couple of years. My husband quit his job when my daughter was born and took over as a stay-at-home dad while I started to be the breadwinner of the house. I did have other side hustles going on, but reselling was really my main focus for that time. So I want to share what I've learned with you, but first I want to tell you why it wasn't for me, because I do get a lot of people that ask me why. One of the things was that I was in a location that I didn't have, there were thrift stores, but I didn't have enough thrift stores to get the inventory I wanted. And like I said, it was right after my daughter was born, so I was having to travel an hour to another city and then spend the entire day thrifting, and I was doing this probably 2, sometimes 3 days a week. So I was really gone a lot with a baby, and that really wasn't the lifestyle that I was looking for. I was trying to be a reseller or work for myself because I wanted to be home. So when I was a full-time reseller, I was just spending so much time out of the house trying to get enough stuff to sell to make a full-time income that it just didn't work out for me. Eventually, I phased out reselling as my full-time income. It just happened gradually over time as I started to bring in and be more serious about other streams of income. Now reselling is a very part-time income for me. My goal is about $1,000 per month in profit, working maybe 10 or 20 hours a month, just because it's something that I love to do and I love to talk about and share with you. So it is something that I still do, but it is nowhere near my full-time income. I just could not cut it as a full-time reseller. It is a lot harder than it seems, and it's a lot harder than just being a part-time or a side hustle reseller. And that's what I want to talk about first. One of the hardest truths I found out as a full-time reseller is that you can't just double the amount of time you work and double your income. It doesn't work that way with reselling. So let's say you're making about $500 a week and you're working about 10 hours a week on the side right now. You can't just make that 40 hours a week and turn that $500 a week into $2,000 a week. The problem that I have is that inventory needs to exist. When you're part-time, you can be picky because you're not 100% relying on that inventory. So if I go into a thrift store, I'm part-time, I can be picky. I can say I'm only picking up items that I know I can sell for a $20 profit. And if I don't find a lot of those items, that's okay because this is my part-time income. When you're full-time, you're going to that store knowing that this is paying your bills, and if you can't find enough items to list, you are not going to make enough money. So you need to make sure that when you're reselling, you have access to enough inventory to make profit. That's the biggest thing that I learned. I think a lot of people think if they spend X amount of time or X amount of money, they can easily double or triple that. But it's not the case, because when you're going into a thrift store as a part-time reseller, you're grabbing the good stuff. And if you go through the whole store in a couple of hours and you only find 10 things, that's fine for a part-time reseller, but for a full-time reseller, you might need more than that to sustain your lifestyle. So that's just the biggest thing to look out for. And it just depends on a lot of factors such as where you're located, how much inventory you can get, etc. Before I continue, I'm going to stop right here and introduce you to today's sponsor, Vendoo. I talk about Vendoo all the time. Vendoo is one of my favorite tools, and it is one of the first investments that you should make in your reselling business if you're really serious about making it a business and even going full-time. I even use it as a part-time reseller. Vendoo makes it really easy to cross-post items, look at your analytics to see what's selling, how much money you're making, and see kind of patterns in your reselling business, what categories, what brands are selling well. And right now they're having a New Year New Money sale, and you can get 50% off your first month with the code New Money. That code will expire January 20th. You can check out the link down below in the description. If you're watching this after January 20th, don't worry, you can still use the link below for a small discount. It's just this New Money promo code that will be expiring on January 20th, where you can get 50% off your first month. I highly recommend Vendoo if you are serious about reselling and you want to expand to different marketplaces, be able to see your analytics, and keep your inventory organized. So I wanted to go over a couple questions you should ask yourself before you decide to be a full-time reseller. If you're a part-time reseller, you're doing it on the side right now, here's what you need to think about before making the leap. The first thing you need to do is look at your financial situation and consider how that's going to look if you quit your job and start reselling full-time. So maybe you're single and you don't have a lot of expenses. Maybe you live with a roommate or you live with your parents, or do you have a partner and no kids? So your partner works and then you want to make the leap from a full-time job to reselling full-time. So you have your partner's income to kind of fall back on if things don't work out or your sales are slow one month. Or are you like me where you have a family to support and you're going to be the main person making the money. So you need to consider all of those factors and see really how serious it is that you make a certain amount of money per month. Another thing you need to consider is, are you disciplined enough to do this? With the problem with resellers is we want to go sourcing. We want to go to thrift stores. We want to go to yard sales. We want to buy all the stuff. But some of us have a lot of, I wouldn't say some of us, a lot of us have a lot of trouble actually getting those items listed. So you really need the discipline. If it's not listed, it's not going to sell. So if you're just out there spending a bunch of money and not spending enough time actually listing those items and getting those items sold, you're going to struggle with making enough income. Another thing to consider is how you'll handle the roller coaster of reselling. If you've been reselling for a while, you know there are really big ups and really big downs. A lot of people have a lot of trouble making sales during the summer, but then they have great sales the last couple of months of the year. So kind of understanding the ebbs and flows of reselling, and if that's going to stress you out too much, if 3 or 4 months in a row you don't make enough money, but then the next couple of months you make a lot of money. So you need to think about how you're going to handle the stress of sometimes just not making enough sales and how you're going to handle that. Another thing is you want to consider what kind of reseller you want to be. Maybe you're a thrifter right now and you spend a couple of hours at Goodwill buying a couple of things and listing them. But like I said, you need a higher volume of items in order to resell full-time. So are you just going to spend more time sourcing out at thrift stores and yard sales, or are you going to look into things like liquidation? Thrifting is fun and we love it, and you can pick out just specifically the items that you know are going to sell, but it is harder to scale. And it's just harder to scale in the sense that you're going to have to spend more time sourcing and more time listing. And a lot of people find that overwhelming and end up having to hire somebody, and then they need to buy even more items and sell even more items to cover that extra overhead. So figuring out a balance there is really important. If you want to try something like buying liquidation pallets, that can be a little bit easier because you're not spending as much time out and about trying to source items, but there is a lot more upfront cost involved. Usually they're $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. And then there's also the risk of getting a pallet that's not good. So there are risks with either form of reselling, and you just need to kind of consider which form you want to pursue. Now I want to give you some of my best tips that I've learned from being a reseller and a full-time reseller. The first thing I kind of mentioned, and that is to know your numbers. Do you really know how much profit you're making after cost of goods, after fees, after saving for taxes? Really understanding your numbers and knowing where your business stands is really important before you quit your job and decide to go in on reselling full-time. All right, my next big tip is to have money in savings. Like I said, reselling is a roller coaster. If you've been doing it for more than a couple of months, you know there are months that are really good and months that are really scary and you don't make as much money as you're used to. And that can be really scary when you're doing it full-time and you're really relying on that income to pay your bills. I personally think you should have at least a couple of months in savings, and that you should live pretty frugally those first few months and stash away more if you can, so that you have something to fall back on those slow months. Next, make sure you treat it like a real business or a real job. You can totally make up your own hours, but make sure you're actually getting your work done. Make sure you're not just sourcing, but you're also photographing and listing items. Maybe come up with a system where you have to have everything listed within 3 days of sourcing. Since this is your full-time job now, you want to make sure that you are in a good rhythm and you are getting things listed very consistently. It can be a lot harder to do the stuff that you don't like to do when you don't have a boss. You want to make sure you consider the volume of items that you need to have on hand, because not all of us have a ton of storage. When I was full-time, I was using a single car garage at my house to house about 1,000 pieces of inventory. I think it was 800 listings, but 1,000 pieces total because I had multiple, some items that I had multiple of. If you don't have this kind of space, it might be harder for you and you might need to get a storage unit or outsource that to a fulfillment company. So just kind of consider that. I also really recommend having a separate bank account. If you don't already have this and you're doing it part-time, I recommend doing it whether or not you're going to be a full-time reseller. But if you're going to be full-time, you definitely need a separate bank account. I actually have several, which puts me into the next tip, which is to try out the profit first method. This method really, I cannot stress how much it helped me as an entrepreneur. Honestly, once I read this book and implemented this, my business changed because I knew exactly what I was doing with my money and I was able to actually pay myself regularly. I knew how much money I could spend, etc. Next up, have really good systems and organization in place. I kind of touched on this when I said maybe you should create a system for when things come in and you need to have them listed within 3 days. Just creating systems in your business where you're not thinking so hard. So maybe you have a process or a system when you get home from sourcing where you input everything into Vendoo, and you just create a quick draft so that you can add pictures to it later, and that way you can easily see which items need to be listed still. Just creating systems and processes in your business that make it a lot easier for you to get your work done efficiently is so important when you're a full-time reseller. Also, you want to make sure that you're making and hitting goals consistently for several months in your business before you quit your full-time job or whatever income you're making right now. That way you know that when you quit your job, you're able to continue to do that moving forward. Of course, you want to make sure you're selling in multiple places. That's where Vendoo comes in because you can easily cross-post your items. I currently sell on 2 platforms, but I have sold on up to 4 platforms in the past because you really need to diversify your income. Even when your whole income is reselling, you should really be on several marketplaces because you never know what's going to happen. And you could get kicked off of eBay one day, and if you are only selling on eBay, there goes your entire income. Even if you don't get kicked off, it's really nice to have multiple marketplaces where you can post your items because you're getting more eyes on your items and you're increasing your chances of that item selling. I post a reseller sales report pretty much every month, and I've been sharing that I'm selling on eBay and Poshmark, and it is about 50-50 for me. So if I was only selling on one of those, I would only be making about half of what I'm making right now. So it's a really good way to boost your income and kind of make your money work for you because you're sourcing those items anyway. If you can get them in front of 2 or 3 different audiences, then you increase your chance of selling those items a lot faster. Don't forget about insurance. A lot of people don't realize how expensive insurance can be if you're not on an employee plan. A lot of times you're getting a discount because you're on a group plan, and then you're also getting a discount because your employer might be covering part of it for you. So we personally get insurance through like the healthcare marketplace, healthcare.gov, I think is the website. I'm not 100% sure, but we pay for it out of pocket through there. There might be other options out there, but just make sure you have enough money to cover insurance. And lastly, I think it's a really good idea to try living off of your reselling income for a couple of months before quitting your job. So if you are able to scale as much as possible before quitting your job, and you can just take your regular income and put it in savings and just live off of that reselling income for a couple of months, that will help you determine how realistic it is for you to be a full-time reseller. Obviously, once you quit your full-time job, you'll have more time to put into reselling. But like I said, you can't just put in double the time and make double the money. It doesn't quite work that way. It's just dependent on so many variables per person, per location, and per situation. It's just so variable. So if you can, try and live off of your reselling income for a couple of months so that you know that you can do that and you can see kind of how it works and if you can cover all your bills, if you need to cut some bills. So hopefully you found this video on full-time reselling really helpful, and hopefully it gave you some insight on what it's like to be a full-time reseller. Like I said, I couldn't cut it as a full-time reseller. Maybe in the future I will try again. Right now you can see we live in an RV and we travel full-time, so it's not realistic for me to resell full-time. But maybe in the future I will be a full-time reseller, and hopefully this video has helped you determine if you want to try full-time reselling yourself. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more videos about reselling, making money from home, and building multiple streams of income, make sure you subscribe and hit that thumbs up so that you can tell YouTube that you enjoyed this video and they can show it to more people. That really helps me out. I will see you next time.